Hi there. Let's talk about layer masks today and how they work in Photoshop. So layer masks are a great benefit to us. They allow us to make modifications to layers and blend and compose and collage images in a way that allows us to kind of edit the process while we're doing it. Typically, if you want to blend one layer into another, you have to do some sort of erasing or copy, clipping, pasting. And you can run into a problem where maybe you remove something you didn't mean to, or you want to bring something back and restore something. And layer masks help you with that a lot. So with this image, what I've got is this, this waterfall and this river, and we're going to composite another image into it and make it look like they were in the scene all along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and place a image that I'm going to use, which is this canoe picture. I went to the File menu, I selected Place. I'm going to drop that canoe picture into this new one. Now, obviously, these pictures are not combined, they're not going together. So what would be my options for blending these two together? One way to go, kind of the old school way, would be to sit here with an eraser and try to figure out how to erase the different sides of the image as I went along. So not going to do that. What's another way to go? Another way to go is going to be to use the layer mask. So I'm going to go over to my layer palette and click on layer mask. That happens to be the little button down at the bottom that has the little black circle in the middle of it, the white square with the black circle. That is going to add a layer mask. Another way to add a layer mask is to go up to the layer menu and select, add layer mask to the layer in my scene. So you have to pay attention. You have to be really careful and pay attention to what portion of the layer is highlighted. So when I click on the photo part of the layer, see that extra little white border appears around that layer segment? That means that I'm actually editing directly on that layer. If instead I select the white part of the layer, the mask part of the layer, that's highlighted in white. And I want to make sure that when I'm editing a layer mask, I'm actually using that portion of the layer and not trying to paint on the real layer itself. So that's one of those little tricky parts for newbies that you got to pay attention to. Make sure you're watching what you're painting on. So the way this works is a layer mask by default is colored white. And just try to remember that when it's colored white, that means everything on the layer is visible. When you paint with black or color a portion of that mask in black, that hides what's on the layer. So let's try this out. If I was going to take my paintbrush and my foreground color is black, and I come over here and I just paint with my mouse. Just paint directly on that image. You can see on the mask now I have a little black line that appears where I brushed. Okay, so that is showing me that I've painted in black in that area and it's hidden that portion of the photo. It looks like it's erasing, right? And that's because I'm using a soft airbrush brush from the brushes palette. But look what happens if I switch colors and I go back to white. So in that same area that I just painted, I start painting with white. And look at how it restores the image. So what does that mean? Again, that means that this layer mask is painting the mask. It's not actually removing or deleting or harming the picture. And that's preferable. What we're always looking for are non-destructive edits, edits that we can complete on our images without actually destroying the image. And this has come in handy many times where I've been working on a composite, and because I used a mask, I was able to restore or fix certain things. Whereas if I'd just been using the eraser, I would have damaged, destroyed, and removed, and I would have had to start all over again. All right, there are a couple other ways to apply a mask aside from just painting. And so I'm going to show you that too. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this or hide this layer, and I'm going to start over actually. I'm going to go ahead and place that canoe picture one more time in my scene. Hit return to drop it in there. By the way, when I place a photo, it's considered a smart object. We'll get into smart objects at another time, but it's preferable when you combine photos to use a smart object, because that means that the image retains its original resolution and it can scale and retain that quality. Okay, so before I hit layer mask this time, I want to show you this. I'm going to go ahead and use quick selection from the selection menu, and I'm going to try to select the dude and the boat. And keep in mind that when you're using quick selection, you can reduce or increase the size of the quick selection using your keyboard. So you can use the left bracket to make the brush a little bit smaller. And notice how it just picked up the ocean, which I don't want. So I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger. And what I need to do is hold Option or Alt on my keyboard. That changes the quick selection into a minus. And I can just kind of go back in there and try to clean up that selection a little bit. If I zoomed in, I could make my brush a little bit smaller and try to remove some of that ocean. Now, by the way, this picture I've got here is really poor quality, so it ain't perfect. It's going to look really bad. Keep that in mind when you're working with photographs and stuff like this. The lower the quality of your image, the poorer your results are going to be as you work with masks or any other type of photo editing. This is an old pixelated image. It looks really bad, so it's not going to turn out very well no matter what I do. Just disclaimer. Okay, so before I do the mask, you'll see now that I've created the selection, and I've selected the positive space, or the space I want to keep. All right, that's key. Now that the selection is active, watch what happens if I click the layer mask button on the layer palette. If I select add layer mask now, notice how it automatically created a mask out of that selection. If you look at the layer mask on that layer, it's got the black background that's hidden, and then it has the white positive space, you know, the outline of the guy in white, which means that's visible. So that's a quick way to get started with a layer mask, is use a selection, do the bits and pieces you want to keep right away, and then create your mask, and you're automatically, you know, halfway there. So there's some touch up that would need to happen on this picture. But again, because it's a mask, I can do that without too much trouble. Let me go ahead and move this dude into place. Bring him down here into the water. I don't really know where he's going. Maybe he should be over here. Yeah, I'm put over here in the white water. I'm going to go ahead and select the layer again. Make sure that I'm selecting the layer itself. And I'm going to scale. So I'm going to go Edit, Transform, and Scale to shrink him down a little bit. He's headed right for the rock. There we go. Make him about that size. Put him there. Boom. Okay, great. Totally fake. Doesn't look right. Not really working. But I think you get the idea of how the mask works. Something also to pay attention on with the mask and the photo object is there's a little chain link between the image and the mask itself. Basically, that means they're linked. And there are situations where you might want to disconnect the mask from the image. You know, watch what would happen if I did that here. If I disconnect it and then I move the guy, you'll see that he moves within the mask that was created, which is not preferable, not what I want to do, but that's to give you an idea of how those things are linked. I'm just going to hit undo, chain up the mask and put it back together. Now, if this was a refined photo and I really wanted to take my time with it, what I would do is zoom in closer. And now I could use my paintbrush, making sure that I'm painting on the mask, reduce the size, and I could go in and do some touch-up. So if I paint with black, I could go in and fix some of these areas that aren't quite right. Some of these things that got missed in my first selection. Now, I'm not going to spend time doing that this time around, but just keep in mind that that's the beauty of this process is you have that mask, which allows you to go back and forth and repair and modify an image as you go. Let's talk about a couple other things you might want to do in this situation to give this a little bit more realism. Notice how the coloring doesn't match. It doesn't look like he came from the same scene, the same light source and all that. So there's that. There's no shadow on the water. There's other things that are missing here that make it look not quite right. So these are some, just little tips and tricks we might try to see if we can improve this. First one is going to be adding a little bit of a layer adjustment. So what I'll do is make sure that I've selected the normal layer with the guy, and I'm going to make sure that I have my adjustment palette open. So here I have my adjustments. If you don't see it, go to the window menu and select adjustments. These are adjustment layers that can be applied to individual objects so that, for example, I can modify the color or the levels or the brightness and contrast of the guy independent from the background. So let's say I wanted to do a hue and saturation adjustment. I would click that hue and saturation adjustment icon. You can see I've dropped that hue and saturation adjustment into my layer palette. If I want that adjustment to just apply to the guy, I can do a couple things. There are two ways to do it actually. I'm going to show you both. First, take a look at how the layer adjustment itself has a mask. Okay, that's really handy. That means that I can tailor I can tailor the adjustment to just specifically that guy. Here's how it's done. I'm going to hold the Command key and I'm going to click the image area of the guy. Sorry, I don't mean the image area. I mean, I'm going to hold the Command key and select the mask portion of the layer. And notice when you do that, when you hold Command or on a PC, you hold Control, and then with your mouse, you click on the mask. That immediately makes a quick selection of whatever is on that layer. That's pretty handy, right? Well, now that I have that selection made, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have highlighted the hue and saturation mask. Now, this is where masks get a little bit tricky because I have just made a selection and you can see that that selection is selecting the positive space. It's selecting the dude. Well, for a layer mask to work, I need that to be the visible area and everything else to be hidden. Essentially, that portion of the mask needs to be left white and the background area of the mask needs to be left black. Well, that selection needs to be reversed is what I'm getting at. So I go to the select menu and I say select inverse. So that's going to flop the selection. Now you can see that there's a a selection box not only around the guy, but around the entire edge, which basically means that it's selecting everything else. Now I'm ready to paint in that mask. I'm not going to use the paintbrush to do this. I'm going to go to the Edit menu, and I'm going to use Fill. So Edit, Fill, and the content I want to use is black because I want that portion of the mask to be painted black. So if I click OK, watch what will happen. That portion of the mask will be painted black, and the center point, the point where the guy is, will be left white. What does this mean? This means that the adjustment, hue and saturation adjustment, will apply only to the guy. It's going to be confined to the guy and not the entire layer. Here's what I mean. I'm going to double click the adjustment portion of the layer, and that's going to pull up the hue and saturation adjustment. Watch what happens if I move the color slider. Notice how the color of the guy is the only thing affected. It isn't affecting the background. That's because that mask is protecting everything else from that adjustment. Now, in fact, all I really wanted to do to make this look a little bit more realistic is desaturate it a little bit and then decrease the lightness a little bit to make it look like he's kind of in shadow and in that space. So you could do the same, just adjusting that hue and saturation. Now, there is an easier way to duplicate a mask, and I'm going to show you that next. So notice how when I adjusted the color, the lightness and darkness, he got a little bit darker. The colors look like they match a little bit better, but his lighting is really bad. The contrast is really bad. Let's do another adjustment layer. This time around, let's do brightness and contrast. So we're going to click on the brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and that's going to drop in that mask. Actually, I did it backwards. Let me undo that. Before I do the brightness and contrast, I need to make my selection, and this is the easy part. If I hold Command or I hold Control and I click the layer mask, that selection is active. Now I'm going to select the brightness and contrast adjustment layer. There we go. That's the easy part I was going for, is I made a mask immediately out of that selection because that selection was active when I created the adjustment layer. So now watch what happens as I adjust brightness and contrast. Let's say I increase contrast a little bit. Increase brightness. Increase contrast. So see how that improves just the brightness and contrast of just the guy. It doesn't affect the entire picture. Okay, now there are other retouching things I could do to fix this picture, like I might clone some of the waves in the background. I might add some shadowy color here to create shading underneath the boat to make it look like he's in the scene. I might, taper and cut and carve out some of the boat to make that white water look like it's rushing up against the side of the boat. There are a variety of things I could do to mess with this picture to make it look like it's more realistic. But mainly my focus with this video was to talk about the layer masks. So I hope you get the idea. Again, it's a little bit confusing to go back and forth between, let's say, black and white on the mask, but just try to remember that white is visible, black is hidden, and so anywhere in between is going to make it semi-transparent, or it's going to make it invisible or visible. All right, so hope that helps you get set up with layer masks, the basics of combining pictures, and I'll talk to you next time. See you later.